Namaste. Assalamu alaikum. Blessed love and peace in Rastafari. This is a this is a 1 hour walkthrough of Torah. Session numero 3. That is the book of Vayikra, which is Leviticus. So as a review, this is part 3 of 5, part 3 of 5. In the first session, we look at Bereshit, the beginning. It is a narrative that spans the duration of actually thousands of years, many centuries, many generations, and the lineage from creation. So that is the first book, numero uno, all the way up to the conclusion of Yosef Avinu, being sold into slavery into Egypt, rising to the ranks of number 2 of Egypt, and receiving his family during the famine to provide for his family. And the book concludes with the blessings of his far, Yaakov Avinu, providing a blessing to all his sons, and passing from life, and then Yosef passing from life. And so that concludes that narrative, that saga up to that moment, at Bereshit. So then between part 1 and part 2, there's a span of a number of generations after that, or between those books. That could be also a few centuries. There's a lot of discussion about that. But there's a span of time between those two books. And in that time, the children of Israel continue to live in Egypt and thrive and flourish and multiply and scare the Egyptians. And eventually there emerges a king, a pharaoh in Egypt, who forgets about what Yosef Avinu does for the benefit of Egypt many generations before that. The people of Egypt forget about what Yosef Avinu does many generations before that, and instead just see these foreigners living in Egypt and feel threatened by that. So then enslave the Egyptians. The Egyptians slave the children of Israel, begin to kill the sons, and let the girls live. And that is when the beginning of the second book occurs, in those conditions. And it is in those conditions that Moshe Rabbeinu is born, in the lineage of the son of Levi, the third son of Yaakov Avinu. So Moshe Rabbeinu is born. And that begins the second book. The second book, Moshe grows up in the house of Pharaoh, adopted by the daughter of Pharaoh. So he grows up in privilege, but he sees the affliction of his people. He stands up, actually kills one of the Egyptians, and then flees into the wilderness. So the second book spans that duration of life of Moshe being born, becoming a man, living in the wilderness, getting married, having children, and then receiving guidance, commandment, inspiration from Elohim, God, to go back to Egypt and free his people, to lead his people into liberation. So that duration is about half a century, and that is what happens. And so then the narrative begins to be slow up significantly. The whole of the Torah slows up significantly in this duration. So the children of Israel leave Egypt. That Pharaoh is vanquished, drowning in the Sea of Reeds. And then the children of Israel continue into the wilderness and begin to receive the guidance about how to live as a righteous nation, going from the corruption that surrounds, going from the experience of being migrants, of migrating from place to place with the flocks of sheep and goats and cows and bulls, into settling in a land, the promised land, as a nation, and to live as a righteous nation in harmony and peace with each other, but also with the universe, with civilization and the natural universe. So it takes some guidance, some teaching, some practice, some trials and tribulations, even after leaving Egypt, to learn that training, to be a civilization, to be to live as a settled nation. So that is where we find ourselves as we begin the third book. The Ten Commandments had just been conferred. There was just 1 year since the time of leaving Egypt until the point where we begin this book of Vayikra. There's just the construction. The second book, Shmot, Exodus, concludes with the construction of the Mishkan, the sanctuary, where the rituals are conducted, the offerings, which involved slaughtering of animals, the libations, the incense, the menorah, the candle, or the lamp, and all of those elements, the garments for the priests. Moshe Rabbeinu's brother Aaron is the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and his sons, Aaron's sons, are the priestly caste amongst the children of Israel, along and amidst the sons of Levi, the tribe in which Moshe Rabbeinu was born. So these elements are just being established at the conclusion of Shmot. The Mishkan is just constructed a year after the leaving Egypt, and now we begin this third book of Vayikra. And this third book of Vayikra goes further into the teachings, the laws that govern the behavior amongst the children of Israel, what the rules of righteousness are, because living as a slave, there's less responsibility of knowledge and less responsibility of settling disputes, deciding what's fair, and so that wisdom that is cultivated through the generations from Abraham Avinu, Yitzchak Avinu, Yaakov Avinu, and additionally begins to be forgotten, particularly in the context of being a settled city or a settled nation. So there is this doctrine, this law of like how to live as this nation, and so this is where we get into much of the substance of that with Vayikra, otherwise known as Leviticus. So with that being said, we begin. Blessing. Bismillah ar-Rahmani ar-Rahim. Allah wabha. Dao ke dao fe chong dao min ke min fe chong min ja Rastafari. Deus nos te quies in celle sanctificito nomen tuum. Vaheguru sana. Baruch ata Elohim Eloheinu melech haolam asher katzanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivan l'sok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Kyrie eleison, sevamas tu save jekatehem, save sata b'avantu sukitata. Fagabiyam. Aquaba upendo na amani, fakiri nisalami, chinta dam permen liba v'miyam. Umejeka. Ubuntu shabono fakitka. Shishem, Kamasunida, Domo Arigato, Pilama Yela Wakatoka, Tako Doko Shingun, Gurman God. God, we thank you for all that you bless us. Ata Jamya Yata Afanami. Bado, Aho, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Amen. So, Vayikra begins with chapter 1, verse 1. Elohim called to Moshe and spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when any of you presents an offering of cattle to Elohim, he shall choose his offering from the herd or from the flock. If his offering is a burnt offering from the herd, he shall make his offering a male without blemish. He shall bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting for acceptance in his behalf before Elohim. He shall lay his hand upon the head of the burnt offering, that it may be acceptable in his behalf, in expiation for him. The bull shall be slaughtered before Elohim, and Aaron's sons, the priests, shall offer the blood, dashing the blood against all the sides of the altar, which is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. So then it goes on to continue the process of the offering. And it goes into rather considerable detail, particularly amidst contemporary experiences and etiquette of genteelness when pertaining to or referring to the slaughtering of animals and consumption of animals, and but this is what it is. So there's a repeated guidance concerning this process of slaughtering animals, and just as a basic summary, The animals that are slaughtered are specifically the bulls, um, sheep, rams, goats, um, birds are, uh, are are included in this as well, but are less prominent. Um, and those are the prominent animals that occur at this moment, to my recollection. Um, Additional types of offering, korban, are bread, um, and there are different types of bread that are offered, or at least different methodologies of preparing the bread. Um, there's incense. There are libations, wine, that are included as well. So those are the prominent elements. Perhaps not necessarily all inclusive, but those are prominent elements. Now, one of the important things to be mindful of is that it's the best. Well, actually, there are specific offerings again, and there's the articulation of that here. Um, some of these include the first of the fruits, the first of the harvest, and it's essentially offering the best of what one has. And so that's one consideration. That's one guidance. And in addition to that, when beyond just providing the first and the best of what one has, it's also a matter of when making other additional types of offering, that any other type of offering that's provided is something that is of a stand. A minimum quality. Like it's not just the throwaway stuff. Like, oh, we're not going to have this anyways, let's offer it up. It's not. That's not acceptable. It's something that one would have consume oneself. Something that one would utilize oneself. And having a standard of what that is, so that the korban abstains from degenerating into just another methodology of refuse. So it's a matter of that mindfulness and honesty of forsaking of oneself, of giving up of something of oneself, and making that offering, so that it is genuinely an offering. Um, so that's some of the general guidance concerning korban, and it goes into further detail here. Um, so this is the description of the burnt offering, and again, verse 10 here, it says, if his offerings for a burnt offering If his offering for a burnt offering is from the flock of sheep or of goats, he shall make his offering a male without blemish. Later, verse 14, if his offering to Elohim is a burnt offering of birds, he shall choose his offering from turtle doves or pigeons. Chapter 10, chapter 2, verse 1. When a person presents an offering of grain to Elohim, his offering shall be of choice flour. He shall pour oil on it, lay frankincense on it, and present it to Aaron's sons, the priests. The priest shall scoop out of it a handful of its choice flour and oil, as well as all of its frankincense, and this token portion he shall turn into smoke on the altar as a gift, a pleasing odor to Elohim. It also specifies, verse 11 here, no grain offering that you offer to Elohim shall be made with leaven. No, otherwise known as chametz. No puffedness. It's the modesty again. So then there are different categories concerning the grain offering. Then there's a different category of offering. If his offering is an offering of well-being, so it's not necessarily a different substance. It's the same material being offered, but for a different cause, for a different reason, for a different on a different premise. There's also the guidance, the mitzvah, concerning the fat of the offering. What can also be considered as like the choicest part of it. With chapter 3, verse 16, he says, the priest shall offer these into smoke on the altar as food, a gift of pleasing odor. All fat is Elohim's. It is a law for all time throughout the ages. In all your settlements, you must not eat any fat or any blood. So then there is the description of somebody committing a violation and incurring guilt because of that, and wanting to make some amends for that guilt. And so there are offerings that are prescribed in that process. That's for an individual who does it. It's for the entire community who does it. It's for leaders who do that. It's whether it's done knowingly or unknowingly and later discovered or learned better. There's what is referred to as a purification offering. Then there's the description of purification. What is pure, what is impure. And this is specifically referring to types of animals, and particularly the carcasses of animals. And then what is to be done when somebody is exposed to impurity. The notion of impurity is that purity and impurity is a very charged consideration. One thing to be mindful of is that this notion of purity also connects to well-being, healthiness, and the prescriptions for cleansing after being exposed to impurity is for the purpose of optimizing the experience of healthiness, wellness, and well-being. So there are a number of details concerning the processes of these offerings. The different animals that I mentioned being offered, sacrificed, and again the different reasons for making these sacrifices. And that concludes Vayikra, the first book of Vayikra. Each first book of each first portion. This concludes the first portion of the third book. Again, for each book, the first portion is always the same name as the book itself. So the second portion is Zav. It begins with chapter 6, and it says, this is verse 1. Elohim spoke to Moshe, saying, command Aaron and his sons thus. This is the ritual of the burnt offering. The burnt offering itself shall remain where it is, burned upon the altar all night until matin, whilst the fire on the altar is kept going on it. The priest shall dress in linen raiment with linen breeches next to his body, and he shall take up the ashes to which the fire has reduced the burnt offering on the altar and place them beside the altar. So there's a fire that is continually burning, and we can see this amongst many traditions around the world. So there's this fire that continues burning, and from that fire, the animal sacrifices are made, and much of the substance of the animals are burnt into ashes. And so there's the necessity of maintenance concerning the altar, concerning where the animals are burned, and the processing of the ashes and further. So there's this description of how these are conducted. And again, chapter 6, verse 5, the fire on the altar shall be kept burning, not to go out. Every time the priest shall feed wood to it, lay out the burning offering on it, and turn into smoke the fat parts of the offering of well-being. A perpetual fire shall be kept burning on the altar, not to go out. So then there's further description of the grain offering. And it is the priests that are conducting these rituals. The people bring the animals, the offerings to the priest, and the priests are the ones who actually conduct the actual rituals. There's the description of a reparation offering. There is a thanksgiving offering. There's the votive offering and a free will offering. So, one thing also to note here in chapter 7 is that the priests, in performing the rituals and knowing how to do this, having the skills, sharing it from generation to generation, and providing the service to the children of Israel, in terms of facilitating this and strengthening this relationship between each child of Israel and Elohim. In providing this service, the priests are provided with some compensation, um, some materiality, sustenance to provide the service. And so the priests receive a portion of the offerings that are made. Shares here in chapter 7, verse 32. And the right thigh from your offerings of well-being you shall present to the priest as a gift. He from amongst Aaron's sons who offers the blood and the fat of the offering of well-being shall get the right thigh as his portion. For I have taken the breast of elevation offering and the thigh of gift offering from the Israelites from their offerings of well-being and given them to Aaron the priest and to his sons as their due from the Israelites for all time. So that is one example of the gifts that are provided to the priest. There's also portions in terms of the bread, the grain offerings, and additionally. So then, when this initial guidance concerning rituals are of offering are communicated, then there is the preparation of the ordination of the priests, particularly Aaron, to perform these rituals. Chapter 8 begins, Elohim spoke to Moshe, saying, take Aaron along with his sons and the vestments, the anointing oil, the bull of purification offering, the 2 rams, and the basket of unleavened bread, and assemble the whole community at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Moshe did as Elohim commanded him, and when the community was assembled at the entrance of the tent of meeting, Moshe said to the community, this is what Elohim has commanded to be done. Then Moshe brought Aaron and his sons forward and washed them with water. He put the tunic on him, girded him with the sash, clothed him with the robe, and put on the ephod on him, girding him with the decorated band with which he tied it to him. He put the breast portion on him and put into the breast portion the Urim and Tumim. And he set the headdress on his head, and on the headdress in front he put the gold frontlet, the holy diadem, as Elohim had commanded Moshe. Moshe took the anointing oil and anointed the tabernacle and all that was in it, thus consecrating them. He sprinkled some of it on the altar 7 times, anointing the altar, all its utensils, and the laver with its stand, to consecrate them. He poured some of the anointing oil upon Aaron's head and anointed him to consecrate him. Moshe then brought Aaron's sons forward, clothed them in tunics, girded them with sashes, and wound turbans upon them as Elohim had commanded Moshe. It goes on to describe the slaughtering of the bull and additional animals in this process, and then further anointment of Aaron and his sons. And then it concludes this portion and this passage by saying, chapter 8, verse 31, 31. Moshe said to Aaron and his sons, boil the flesh at the entrance of the tent of meeting and eat it there with the blood that is in the basket of ordination, as I commanded. Aaron and his sons shall eat it, and what is left over of the flesh and the bread you shall consume in fire. You shall not go outside the entrance of the tent of meeting for 7 days until the day that your period of ordination is completed. For your ordination will require 7 days. Everything done today, Elohim has commanded to be done 7 days, to make expiation for you. You shall remain at the entrance of the tent of meeting day and night for 7 days, keeping Elohim's charge, that you may not die, for so I have been commanded. And Aaron and his sons did all the things that Elohim had commanded through Moshe. And that is the conclusion of this portion. And we can continue on into the next one, which is Shmini, beginning with chapter 9, verse 1. On the 8th day, Moshe called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. He said to Aaron, take a calf of the herd for a purification offering and a ram for a burnt offering without blemish, and bring them before Elohim, and speak to the Israelites, saying, take a he-goat for a purification offering, a calf and a lamb. yearlings without blemish for a burnt offering, and an ox and a ram for an offering of well-being to offer before Elohim, and a grain offering with oil mixed in. For today Elohim will appear to you. So then there's the description of that process. And it's fairly detailed in describing that process. So in this process, I'll just read the conclusion of the chapter. Beginning with verse 22. Aaron lifted his hands towards the people and blessed them, and he stepped down after offering the purification offering, the burnt offering, and the offering of well-being. Moshe and Aaron then went inside the tent of meeting. When they came out, they blessed the people, and the presence of Elohim appeared to all the people. Fire came forth from before Elohim and consumed the burnt offering and the fat parts on the altar. And all the people saw and shouted and fell on their faces. So this is something that's atypical. This was other than the usual type of experience. So this is a unique occurrence, and also during the specific time, beginning with chapter 10, which immediately continues from the passage I just read. There's a significant event that occurs, and it reads as this, beginning with again chapter 10, verse 1. Now Aaron's sons Nadav and Avihu each took his fire pan, put fire in it, and laid incense on it, and they offered before Elohim alien fire, which Elohim had not enjoined upon them. And fire came forth from Elohim and consumed them. Thus they died at the instance of Elohim. Then Moshe said to Aaron, this is what Elohim meant when Elohim said, through those near to me I show myself holy and gain glory before all the people. And Aaron was silent. So the two sons of Aaron, who are priests, offered an offering that was not prescribed, was outside of what the guidance was, and because of that, are killed, consumed in the same fire that is consuming the offerings. So then there is the reconciling with that incident. And the heaviness of that. And then there's further direction to the priests about behavior and being priests categorically, but particularly amidst the rituals. One of that is with chapter 10, verse 8. And Elohim spoke to Aaron, saying, drink no wine or other intoxicant, you or your sons, when you enter the tent of meeting, that you may not die. This is a law for all time throughout the ages, for you must distinguish between the sacred and the profane, and between the impure and the pure. And you must teach the Israelites all the laws which Elohim has imparted to them through Moshe. So again, sobriety, having mindfulness to be able to be responsible in sharing the teachings, the wisdom. But then additional offerings are provided. Prescriptions about the priest being obligated to eat of the offerings as well. And then with chapter 11, there are the rules of kashrut, and it goes into the specific list of animals that can be consumed and animals that cannot be consumed. One of the basic, I'll just recite one of the basic distinctions. These are the creatures. This is chapter. I'll just begin with chapter 11, verse 1. Elohim spoke to Moshe and Aaron, saying to them, "Speak to the Israelite people thus: These are the creatures that you may eat from amongst all the land animals. Any animal that has two hoofs, with clefts through the hoofs, and that chews the cud, such you may eat. The following, however, are of those that either chew the cud or have true hooves, you shall not eat: the camel." And then it goes on again through the list of different types of animals that don't qualify for that. That might have one quality but don't have all the qualities. And then it continues on verse 9. These you may eat of all that live in water, anything in water, whether in the seas or in the streams that has fins and scales. These you may eat, but anything in the seas or in the streams that has no fins and scales, amongst all the swarming things of the water and amongst all the other living creatures that are in the water, they are an abomination for you, and an abomination for you they shall remain. You shall not eat of their flesh, and you shall not abominate their carcasses. Well, excuse me. You shall not eat of their flesh, and you shall abominate their carcasses. So those are some of the basic categories, the basic guidance, and then again it goes into a listing of the different animals. And again, the notion of pure and impure is it can be understood in terms of a virtuous thing, but it's actually further. It's actually connected, but it's the purpose of it is health and well-being, and their depths concerning the connection between the behavior of the animals and healthiness. Um, so I'm going to um, pause on the commentary of Kashrut at this moment and just continue articulating what is here. The additional, and this is also in the context of other elements of terms of dietary hygiene. When animals fall into containers, what to do with the containers, whether certain containers are destroyed, whether certain containers are washed, put through fire to be cleansed, and additionally. So, what to do with animal carcasses, what to do after being in contact with animal carcasses, and further. And that essentially concludes this portion of Shmini. The next one is Tazria, begins with chapter 12. Elohim spoke to Moshe, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people thus: When a woman at childbirth bears a male, she shall be impure 7 days. She shall be impure as at the time of her menstrual infirmity. On the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. She shall remain in a state of blood purification for 33 days. She shall not touch any consecrated thing, nor enter the sanctuary until her period of purification is completed. If she bears a female, she shall be impure 2 weeks as during her menstruation, and she shall remain in a state of blood purification for 66 days. On the completion of her period of purification for either son or daughter, she shall bring to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting a lamb in its first year for a burnt offering, and a pigeon or a turtle dove for a purification offering. He shall offer it before Elohim and make expiation on her behalf. She shall then be pure from her flow of blood. Such are the rituals concerning her who bears a child, male or female. If, however, her means do not suffice for a sheep, she shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, one for a burnt offering and the other for a purification offering. The priest shall make expiation on her behalf, and she shall be pure." So with Tazria, this portion, we're getting into the laws of cleanliness, particularly amongst people, amongst the children of Israel. Again, we begin here with childbirth, one of the foundational experiences in life, and how to maintain this experience of cleanliness for the sake of well-being, healthiness amongst all kinfolk. And then it gets into other elements of health and disease and cleanliness amidst this, particularly leprosy. When a person has, this is looking at chapter 13, verse 2, when a person has on the skin of his body a swelling, a rash, or a discoloration, and it develops into a scaly affection on the skin of his body, it shall be reported to Aaron the priest or to one of his sons the priests. The priest shall examine the affection on the skin of his body. If hair in the affected patch has turned white and the affection appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, it is a leprous affection. When the priest sees it, he shall pronounce him impure. So then it goes into what is prescribed when somebody is diagnosed with leprosy. There's a period of isolation and then additional review and separation from the rest of the community to prevent contamination and spreading. And that notion of spreading disease contamination is, again, it's a physiological experience amongst an individual, but it's also a behavioral experience as well. When we look at the contamination of corruption and otherwise, so there's a continuity, there's a continuum between these experiences that is appropriate to be mindful of. So then there are a number of different scenarios of experiences, of symptoms concerning the skin conditions particularly, and other types of contagious afflictions and disease. the process of examination, what the criteria is, how to determine whether something is actually a disease or if it's something that is comparatively benign. Then there's the description of what a person does upon healing from that affection, after being sequestered, after being isolated from the community, and then being healing, then having to return and proceed through a process of washing and shaving of the hair, shaving the hair and then washing, and then returning into the community and going through going through a ritual again of offering that is officiated by the priest, and then returning into the community. There are additional conditions in terms of hair loss, and eruptions of the skin. Even when there is discoloration in similar experiences observed amongst material fabric, particularly wool, linen, the skins of animals, and the cloths derived from plants. So that concludes this parsha, and then the next one continues with these directions, with this guidance. It's Mitzorah, and it begins with chapter 14:14. Elohim spoke to Moshe, saying, "This shall be the ritual for a leper at the time that he is to be purified. When it has been reported to the priest shall go outside the camp. If the priest sees that the leper has been healed of his scaly affection, the priest shall order 2 live pure birds, cedar wood, kedar wood, crimson stuff, and hyssop to be brought for him who is to be purified. The priest shall order one of the birds slaughtered, where the purification offering and the burnt offering are slaughtered." So then, again, further detail into that process of the slaughtering of the bird. When the one bird is slaughtered, actually, the second bird is actually set free. So there is certain symbolism and spiritual significance in those in that process. There's also repeated here, it's stated before, but then it's repeated here also, the notion of and the allowance or the protocols for if somebody doesn't have the money, if somebody doesn't have the material riches to provide for a bull for an offering, or even a sheep, or even turtle doves, then there are other things that can be provided, including even a grain offering. So it says here, chapter 14, verse 14:21. If, however, he is poor and his means are insufficient, he shall take 1 lamb for a reparation offering to be elevated expiation for him. That is other than the passage I'm thinking about at the moment. So I'm going to continue on. So, after the description of how a man or woman proceeds from the healing and the ritual, then there's again further description about plagues that break out again into material items. I mentioned before the skins and cloths, but then it also describes outbreaks in walls within dwellings, house dwellings, and then the processes for evaluation, and then evacuation, and then the cleaning of those conditions, whether it's a matter of just washing and scraping away that which looks suspicious, or whether it's a matter of completely demolishing the edifice that has been affected. Then it goes into the categories of discharge, and this is in a comparatively in a context of sexual experience. This discharge is actually an unnormal discharge. It's not an emission of semen, which is later described. But this is, I'll just describe it. Chapter 15, I'll just read it. Chapter 15, verse 1. Elohim spoke to Moshe and Aaron, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when any man has a discharge issuing from his member, he is impure. The impurity from his discharge shall mean the following: whether his member runs with the discharge or is stopped up so that there is no discharge, his impurity means this: any bedding on which the one with the discharge lies shall be impure, and every object on which he sits shall be impure. Anyone who touches his bedding shall wash his clothes, bathe in water, and remain impure until evening." So it goes into further detail and explanation about the process of healing, separation from the uncleanliness, washing and healing after the discharge is alleviated. And so then it describes again a regular, normal emission of semen, with again chapter 15, verse 16. 15:16. When a man has an emission of semen, he shall bathe his whole body in water and remain impure until evening. All cloth or leather on which semen falls shall be washed in water and remain impure until evening. And if a man has carnal relations with a woman, they shall bathe in water and remain impure until evening. When a woman has a discharge, her discharge being blood from her body, she shall remain in her menstrual impurity 7 days. Whoever touches her shall be impure until evening. Anything that she lies on during her menstrual impurity shall be impure, and anything that she sits on shall be impure. Anyone who touches her bedding shall wash his clothes, bathe in water, and remain impure until evening. And anyone who touches any object on which she has sat shall wash his clothes, bathe in water, and remain impure until evening. Be it the bedding or be it the object on which she has sat, on touching it he shall be impure until evening. And if a man lies with her, her menstrual impurity is communicated to him. He shall be impure 7 days, and any bedding on which he lies shall become impure. So now those are the normal courses. When a man has an emission of semen, when a woman has her menstrual flow, these are the protocols that are involved in terms of maintaining cleanliness and mindfulness accordingly. And it may seem, in a contemporary sense, amidst secular science and additionally as excessive hygienic fastidiousness. However, it's beneficial to recognize that in both of these circumstances, a man's emission of semen, the semen is the seed of the man. There is the propensity of life, eternal life, continuing life for perpetual generations. It's a very sacred, primordial phenomena. It's energy. And so when there's that emission, there's this expulsion of life force, and so it's mindfulness of that, the significance of that. Same thing with a woman's menstrual flow. The seed that comes from her womb has propensity for perpetual generations. It's a life force. So when it's emitted from her body in a different process, the monthly cycle, again, there's a mindfulness for that. So these are some of the protocols of maintaining that mindfulness, and not just an ordinary kind of, oh, it's just another, like eating something, or even eating something is a sacred, mindful thing, but it's something to be mindful of, and to be in that mindfulness, to be attentive and responsible with. So these are protocols to maintain and cultivate and optimize that mindfulness. It then goes on to describe when a woman has an unnormal discharge of blood, and the processes surrounding that and healing from that as well. And that is the conclusion of Tazria. So then it goes into the next parsha portion, which is Acharemot, begins chapter 16. Elohim spoke to Moshe after the death of the two sons of Aaron who died when they drew too close to the presence of Elohim. Elohim said to Moshe, "Tell your brother Aaron that he is not to come at will into the shrine behind the curtain in front of the cover that is upon the ark, lest he die. For I appear in the cloud over the cover. Thus only shall Aaron enter the shrine with a bull of the herd for a purification offering and a ram for a burnt offering. He shall be dressed in a sacral linen tunic with linen breeches next to his flesh, and be girt with a linen sash, and he shall wear a linen turban." So then there are additional protocols for the Kohen Gadol, for Aaron, the high priest, when approaching the holy place of the sanctuary and making offering. Further description concerning expiation and making an offering. And this is a specific type of offering where there are two goats. Again, similarly with the situation with the two birds, one of the goats is slaughtered, and then the other goat is cast into the wilderness. Um, some translation describes it as being set free, but as a dedication to what is referred to as Azazel, and that is another rather dense and convoluted reference. But other descriptions of it are that the goat that is set free is actually sent over a rocky cliff, where it essentially is sent to demise as well. So um, those are some of the descriptions concerning this particular ceremony. And this is later, or this is articulated with the observance of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. It states here, chapter 16, verse 29, 29, and this shall be to you a law for all time. In the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, you shall practice self-denial, and you shall do no manner of work, neither the citizen nor the alien who resides amongst you. For on this day expiation shall be made for you to purify you of all your sins. You shall be pure before Elohim. It shall be a Shabbat of complete rest for you, and you shall practice self-denial. It is a law for all time. The priest who has been anointed and ordained to serve as priest in place of his far shall make expiation. He shall put on the linen vestments, the sacral vestments. He shall purge the innermost shrine. He shall purge the tent of meeting and the altar, and he shall make expiation for the priest and for all the people of the congregation. Again, additional guidance concerning the performance of animal offerings. And then from here we go into rules of behavior. We've had these descriptions of the animal sacrifices. We have these descriptions of cleanliness, of pure and impure. We have the rules of kashrut. We have the rules of the emissions of the emission of semen, the menstrual flow, the cleanliness around these, healing after experiences of affliction, and now there's the description of behavior. The first is to abstain from doing the things that the people who are first on the land are doing, because those practices have corruption. So I'll just begin with chapter 18, verse 1. Elohim spoke to Moshe, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, I, Elohim, am your God. You shall not copy the practices of the land of Egypt where you dwelt, or of the land of Canaan to which I am taking you, nor shall you follow their laws. My rules alone shall you observe, and faithfully follow my laws. I, Elohim, am your God. You shall keep my laws and my rules, by the pursuit of which man shall live. I am Elohim. None of you shall come near anyone of his own flesh to uncover nakedness. I am Elohim." So first there's the general proclamation of abiding by these rules, and now it gets into the specific rules specifically pertaining sexual activity. I'll just go through some of the list. Again, continuing on. None of you shall come near any of his own flesh to uncover nakedness. I am Elohim. Your far's nakedness, that is the nakedness of your mor, you shall not uncover. She is your mor, you shall not uncover her nakedness. Do not uncover the nakedness of your far's wife, it is the nakedness of your far. The nakedness of your sister, your far's daughter, or your mor's, whether born into the house, whether born into the household or outside, do not uncover their nakedness. The nakedness of your son's daughter or of your daughter's daughter, do not uncover their nakedness, for their nakedness is yours. The nakedness of your far's wife's daughter, who has born into your far's household, she is your sister, do not uncover her nakedness. Do not uncover the nakedness of your far's sister, she is your far's flesh. Do not uncover the nakedness of your mor's sister, for she is your mor's flesh. Do not uncover the nakedness of your far's brother, do not approach his wife, she is your aunt. Do not uncover the nakedness of your daughter-in-law, she is your son's wife, you shall not uncover her nakedness. Do not uncover the nakedness of your brother's wife, it is the nakedness of your brother. Do not uncover the nakedness of a woman and her daughter, nor shall you marry her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter, and uncover her nakedness. They are kindred, it is depravity. Do not marry a woman as a rival to her sister and uncover her nakedness in the other's lifetime. Do not come near a woman during her period of impurity to uncover her nakedness. Do not have carnal relations with your neighbor's wife and defile yourself with her. Do not allow any of your offspring to be offered up to Molech, and do not profane the name of your God. I am Elohim. Do not lie with a male as one lies with a woman. It is an abhorrence. Do not have carnal relations with any beast and defile yourself thereby. And let no woman lend herself to a beast to mate with it. It is perversion. Do not defile yourselves in any of those ways, for it is by such that the nations that I am casting out before you defiled themselves. Thus the land became defiled, and I called it to account for its iniquity, and the land spewed out its inhabitants. But you must keep my laws and my rules, and you must not do any of those abhorrent things, neither the citizen nor the stranger who resides amongst you. For all those abhorrent things were done by the people who were in the land before you, and the land became defiled. So let not the land spew you out for defiling it, as it spewed out the nation that came before you. All who do any of those abhorrent things, such persons shall be cut off from their people. You shall keep my charge not to engage in any of the abhorrent practices that were carried on before you, and you shall not defile yourselves through them. I, Elohim, am your God. That's the conclusion of that portion. Then we get into Kiddoshim. So Kiddoshim is actually translates as basically the holy people, the holy beings. And it provides further specific teachings concerning righteousness and some rather profound maxims here. So it begins with chapter 19, verse 1. Elohim spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the whole Israelite community and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, Elohim, your God, am holy. You shall each revere his mor and his far, and keep my Shabbat. I, Elohim, am your God. Do not turn to idols or make molten deities for yourselves. I, Elohim, am your God. It goes on to offerings, and then verse 9 states, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not pick your vineyard bare, or gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I, Elohim, am your God. You shall not steal, you shall not deal deceitfully or falsely with one another. You shall not swear falsely by my name, profaning the name of your God. I am Elohim. You shall not defraud your fellow. You shall not commit robbery. The wages of a laborer shall not remain with you until the matan. You shall not insult the deaf or place a stumbling block before the blind. You shall fear your God. I am Elohim. You shall not render an unfair decision. Do not favor the poor or show deference to the rich. Judge your kinsmen fairly. Do not deal basely with your countrymen. Do not gain by the blood of your fellow. I am Elohim. You shall not hate your kinsman in your heart. Reprove your kinsman, but incur no guilt because of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen. Love your fellow as yourself. I am Elohim. You shall observe my laws. Then it goes on to describe the sanctity of animals and again, additional rules concerning sexual behavior. Rules about diet. Again, proper guidance for children, abstaining from prostitution. Again, for verse 33 here, when a stranger resides with you in your land, you shall not wrong him. The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as one of your citizens. You shall love him as yourself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I, Elohim, am your God. You shall not falsify measures of length, weight, or capacity. You shall have an honest balance, honest weights, an honest ephah, and an honest hin. I, Elohim, am your God, who freed you from the land of Egypt. You shall faithfully observe all my laws and all my rules. I am Elohim. Again, there's explicit guidance to abstain from sacrificing children. Then there's further details concerning the different types of adultery and the prohibition against all types of adultery and the different consequences for the different types of adultery. Some of it is death. Some of it is casting away, being outcast. Some of it involves compensation. And there's the conclusion of Kiddushim. The next portion is Yamur, and it begins with chapter 21. Elohim said to Moshe, speak to the priests, the sons of Aaron, and say to them, none shall defile himself for any dead person amongst his kin, except for the relatives that are closest to him, his mor, his far, his son, his daughter, and his brother, and also for a virgin sister close to him, because she is not married. For her he may defile himself, but he shall not defile himself as a kinsman by marriage, and so profane himself. So these are specific rules just for the priests. It continues on. They shall not shave smooth any part of their heads, or cut the side growths of their beards, or make gashes in their flesh. They shall be holy to their God, and not profane the name of their God. For they offer Elohim's gifts, the food of their God, and so must be holy. They shall not marry a woman defiled by harlotry, nor shall they marry one divorced from her husband. For they are holy to Elohim, and you must treat them as holy, since they offer the food of your God. They shall be holy to you, for I, Elohim, who sanctify you, am holy. And again, further protocols and consequences and concerning priests, the Levim, the Kohanim, and the specific characteristics of that qualify even amongst the Kohanim, also being without blemish. Specific rules about cleanliness, particularly amidst the sanctuary, and eating from the offerings that are provided from the children of Israel. And similarly, minimum qualities concerning the animals that are offered. And then we have at the conclusion of Amor, and this continues for an extended period. This is the calendar. Actually, it's not the conclusion of Amor, but in this portion of it, it states the time, the calendar. It sets the calendar of the observances of the formal rituals for all of the children of Israel. Chapter 23 begins, Elohim spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the Israelite people and say to them, these are my fixed times, the fixed times of Elohim, which you shall proclaim as sacred occasions. On 6 days work may be done, but on the seventh day there shall be a Shabbat of complete rest, a sacred occasion. You shall do no work, it shall be a Shabbat of Elohim throughout your settlements. These are the set times of Elohim, the sacred occasions which you shall celebrate, each at its appointed time. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at twilight, there should be a Pesach, a Passover offering to Elohim, and on the 15th day of that month, Elohim's feast of unleavened bread. You shall eat unleavened bread for 7 days. On the first day you shall celebrate a sacred occasion. You shall not work at your occupations. 7 days you shall make gifts to Elohim. The seventh day shall be a sacred occasion. You shall not work at your occupations. Elohim spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the Israelite people and say to them, When you enter the land that I'm giving you, and you reap its harvest, you shall bring the first sheaf of your harvest to the priest. He shall elevate the sheaf before Elohim for acceptance in your behalf. The priest shall elevate it on the day after Shabbat. On the day that you elevate the sheaf, you shall offer as a burnt offering to Elohim a lamb of the first year without blemish. The grain offering with it shall be 2/10 of a measure of choice flour with oil mixed in, a gift of pleasing odor to Elohim, and the libation with it shall be of wine, 1/4 of a hin, until that very day, until you have brought the offering of your God. You shall eat no bread or parched grain or fresh ears. It is a law for all time throughout the ages in all your settlements. And from the day on which you bring the sheaf of elevation offering, the day after the Shabbat, you shall count off 7 weeks. They must be complete. You must count until the day after the 7th week, 50 days. Then you shall bring an offering of new grain to Elohim. You shall bring from your settlements 2 loaves of bread as an elevation offering. Each shall be made of 2/10 of a measure of choice flour, baked after leavening as first fruits to Elohim. With bread you shall present as burnt offerings to Elohim 7 yearling lambs without blemish, 1 bull of the herd, and 2 rams, and with their grain offerings and libations, a gift of pleasing odor to Elohim. You shall also offer 1 he-goat as a purification offering, and 2 yearling lambs as an offering of well-being. The priest shall elevate these, the 2 lambs, together with the bread of the first fruits as an elevation offering before Elohim. They shall be holy to Elohim for the priest. On that same day you shall hold a celebration. It shall be a sacred occasion for you. You shall not work at your occupations. This is a law for all time in all your settlements throughout the ages. And when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I, Elohim, am your God. Elohim spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, speak to the Israelite people thus. In the 7th month, on the first day of the month, you shall observe complete rest, a sacred occasion commemorated with loud blasts. You shall not work at your occupations, and you shall bring a gift to Elohim. Elohim spoke to Moshe, saying, Mark the 10th day of this 7th month is the day of atonement. It shall be a sacred occasion for you. You shall practice self-denial, and you shall bring a gift to Elohim. You shall do no work throughout that day, for it is a day of atonement, on which expiation is made on your behalf before Elohim your God. Indeed, any person who does not practice self-denial throughout that day shall be cut off from his kin, and whoever does any work throughout that day, I will cause that person to perish from amongst his people. Do no work whatever. It is a law for all time throughout the ages in all your settlements. It is a Shabbat of complete rest for you, and you shall practice self-denial on the 9th day of the month at evening. From evening to evening you shall observe this, your Shabbat. Elohim spoke to Moshe, saying, Say to the Israelite people, on the 15th day of this 7th month, there shall be the Feast of Booths to Elohim, to last 7 days. The first day shall be a sacred occasion. You shall not work at your occupations. 7 days you shall bring gifts to Elohim. On the 8th day you shall observe a sacred occasion and bring a gift to Elohim. It is a solemn gathering. You shall not work at your occupations. Those are the set times of Elohim that you shall celebrate as sacred occasions, bringing gifts to Elohim, burnt offerings, grain offerings, sacrifices, and libations on each day what is proper to it, apart from the Shabbat of Elohim, and apart from your gifts and from all your votive offerings and from all your freewill offerings that you give to Elohim. So it goes on to provide specific details concerning the concluding ceremony, or the concluding observance that is listed here after the harvest. It is Sukkot, and so there are specific further details concerning the observance of Sukkot. Then the guidance for the menorah, the lighting of the lamp, is provided. Chapter 24. Elohim spoke to Moshe, saying, Command the Israelite people to bring you clear oil of beaten olives for lighting, for kindling lamps regularly. Aaron shall set them up in the tent of meeting outside the curtain of the covenant to burn from evening till matan before Elohim regularly. It is a law for all time throughout the ages. He shall set up the lamps on the pure lampstand before Elohim to burn regularly. There is the incident of a man who takes the name of Elohim in vain, and there is the penalty of stoning. And then the protocol of life for life is again reiterated, and that is the conclusion of Amor. Then in Parsha Behar, chapter 25 begins, Elohim spoke to Moshe on Mount Sinai, speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land that I assign to you, the land shall observe a Shabbat of Elohim. 6 years you may sow your field, and 6 years you may prune your vineyard and gather in the yield, but in the 7th year the land shall have a Shabbat of complete rest, a Shabbat of Elohim. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. You shall not reap the aftergrowth of your harvest or gather the grapes of your untrimmed vines. It shall be a year of complete rest for the land. But you may eat whatever the land during its Shabbat will produce. You, your male and female slaves, the hired and bound laborers who live with you, and your cattle and the beasts in your land may eat all its yield. You shall count off 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7 years, so that the period of 7 weeks of years gives you a total of 49 years. Then you shall sound the horn loud in the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, the Day of Atonement. You shall have the horn sounded throughout your land, and you shall hallow the 50th year. You shall proclaim the release throughout the land for all its inhabitants. It shall be a Yovel, a jubilee for you. Each of you shall return to his holding, and each of you shall return to his family. That 50th year shall be a jubilee, a Yovel for you. You shall not sow, neither shall you reap the aftergrowth or harvest the untrimmed vines, for it is a jubilee, Yovel. It shall be holy to you. You may only eat the growth direct from the field. In this year of Yovel, Jubilee, each of you shall return to his holding. When you sell property to your neighbor or buy any from your neighbor, you shall not wrong one another. In buying from your neighbor, you shall deduct only for the number of years since the Yovel, and in selling he shall charge you only for the remaining crop years. The further such years, the higher the price you pay. The fewer such years, the lower the price. For what he is selling you is a number of harvests. Do not wrong one another, but fear your God, for I, Elohim, am your God. So that's the proclamation of the Yovel, the Jubilee. 50th year, everything is set free. People who are servants, enslaved, indebted, it's all forgiven. People return to their ancestral homes. Everyone in the children of Israel is given a portion of the promised land. That passes from one generation to the next, so it stays in the family, it stays in the lineage. Now people can sell that their ancestral inheritance. If they're experiencing economic difficulties or whatever, they can get the money and do something else with it, and be without that land for a certain period. But they're not selling it in perpetuity. It's only up to 50 years. So what they're actually selling is not the land, but the number of harvests that can be gleaned from the land. And so by that 50th year, the land is then returned to that family, to the individual of that family, and continues within the inheritance of that family. Same thing with if somebody sells themselves into servitude. First, there's a limitation already of 6 years, then the 7th year being set free. But particularly with the Yovel, the servants are set free. So there's a cleansing. There's a cognitive cleansing and healing that is prescribed, of not holding these imaginations of ownership over each other, and that everything is released, recognizing that ultimately everything belongs and is owned by Elohim, by God, by the ultimate reality. And so this is part of the guidance of inheriting the land and staying on the land, is observing and recognizing the priority of these protocols of liberation and what liberation truly is. States here, chapter 25, verse 23, but the land must not be sold beyond reclaim, for the land is mine. You are but strangers, resident with me. Throughout the land that you hold, you must provide for the redemption of the land. So then there's further details about living in cities, and different arrangements accordingly. There is the provision for owning foreigners in perpetuity. So there is that element of reconciliation. And then there's the conclusion of this portion. The next portion in Bechukotai, begins with chapter 26, verse 3. If you follow my laws and faithfully observe my commandments, I will grant you rains in their season, so that the earth shall yield its produce, and the trees of the field their fruit. Your threshing shall overtake the vintage, and your vintage shall overtake the sowing. You shall eat your fill of bread, and dwell securely in your land. I will grant peace in the land, and ye shall lie down untroubled by anyone. I will give the land respite from vicious beasts, and no sword shall cross your land. You shall give chase to your enemies, and they shall fall before you by the sword. 5 of you shall give chase to 100, and 100 of you shall give chase to 10,000. Your enemy shall fall before you by the sword. I will look with favor upon you and make you fertile and multiply you, and I will maintain my covenant with you. You shall eat old grain long stored, and you shall have to clear out the old to make room for the new. I will establish my abode in your midst, and I will not spurn you. I will be ever present in your midst. I will be your God, and you shall be my people. I, Elohim, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the land of the Egyptians, to be their slaves no further, who broke the bars of your yoke and made you walk erect. So that is the covenant. Living in this righteous way, the rains are provided. There's abundance, peace, confidence, security from outside threats, a strength and power that is indescribable, and it's not a matter of ego, but it's just a matter of the nature of the power of that harmony. When people, the children of Israel, live in this way, in this righteous way of harmony. Then if not, but if you continue on with verse 14, but if you do not obey me and do not observe all these commandments, if you reject my laws and spurn my rules, so that you do not observe all my commandments and you break my covenant, I in turn will do this to you. I will wreak misery upon you, consumption and fever, which cause the eyes to pine and the body to languish. You shall sow your seed to no purpose, for your enemies shall eat it. I will set my face against you, and you shall be routed by your enemies, and your foes shall dominate you. You shall flee, though none pursues. And if for all that you do not obey me, I will go on to discipline you sevenfold for your sins, and I will break your proud glory. I will make your skies like iron and your earth like copper, so that your strength shall be spent to no purpose. Your land shall not yield its produce, nor shall the trees of your land yield their fruit. And if you remain hostile towards me and refuse to obey me, I will go on smiting you sevenfold for your sins. I will loose wild beasts against you, and they shall bereave you of your children and wipe out your cattle. They shall decimate you, and your roads shall be deserted. And if these things fail to discipline you for me, and you remain hostile to me, I too will remain hostile to you. I in turn will smite you with sevenfold for your sins. I will bring a sword against you to wreak vengeance for the covenant. And if you withdraw into your cities, I will send pestilence amongst you, and you shall be delivered into enemy hands. When I break your staff of bread, 10 women shall bake your bread in a single oven, and they shall dole out your bread by weight, and though you eat, you shall not be satisfied. Continues on with further detail and graphic. But if despite this you disobey me and remain hostile to me, I will act against you in wrathful hostility. I, for my part, will discipline you sevenfold for your sins. You shall eat the flesh of your sons and the flesh of your daughters. I will destroy your cult places and cut down your incense stands. I will heap your carcasses upon your lifeless fetishes. I will spurn you. I will lay your cities in ruin and make your sanctuaries desolate, and I will not savor your pleasing odors. I will make the land desolate, so that your enemies who settle in it shall be appalled by it. And you I will scatter amongst the nations, and I will unsheath the sword against you. Your land shall become a desolation, and your cities a ruin. Then shall the land make up for its Shabbat years throughout the time that it is desolate, and you are in the land of your enemies. Then shall the land rest and make up for its Shabbat years. Throughout the time that it is desolate, it shall observe the rest it did not observe in your Shabbat years whilst you were dwelling upon it. So there is that balance. Then there's the description of the return, the redemption. One of the Hebrew words is teshuvah. It says here, verse 26, chapter 26, verse 41, when I in turn have been hostile to them and have removed them into the land of their enemies, then at last shall their obdurate heart humble itself, and they shall atone for their iniquity. Then will I remember my covenant with Yaakov. I will remember also my covenant with Yitzhak, and also my covenant with Abraham, and I will remember the land. For the land shall be forsaken of them, making up for its Shabbat years by being desolate of them, whilst they atone for their iniquity, for the abundant reason that they rejected my rules and spurned my laws. Yet even then, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not reject them or spurn them as to destroy them, annulling my covenant with them, for I, Elohim, am their God. I remember in their favor the covenant with the ancients, whom I freed from the land of Egypt in the sight of the nations to be their God. I, Elohim, that Elohim established through Moshe on Mount Sinai between Elohim and the Israelite people. So even though there's the blessing, then there's the curse, and then there's the redemption. From that, then there's the description of vows. Then the different types of vows are described, different categories of people provide different categories, basically provide distinguished by age and gender, sex. Additional types of vows are provided, are described, I should say. And that actually concludes this Parsha as well as this book of Vayikra and this session. And also as a reminder, this is the duration of this is comparatively brief. A lot of the text here is not just, but it is just. It is simply law. So there's, in terms of the progression of time, it may be considered comparatively brief. So just putting into context. There it is. Alhamdulillah, ar-Rahmani ar-Rahim. Allah wabham. Dao ke dao fe chong dao. Min ke min fe chong min. Ja Rastafari. Deus nos te kies in cele sanctificita nomen tuum. Vayikra sanam. Baruch ata Elohim, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher ksanu b'mitzotav v'tzivanu l'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Kyrie eleison, sevamastu savejekatahim, sabe sata b'avantu sukitata. Vagabiyam, akwaba upendo na amani, fikiri na sinami, chinta dam per me, lebav me, umanjika, ubuntu shabano fikitka. Session, kamosunida, domo arigato, pelama yelo wakato, tokodoko shingun, gomanigat. God, we thank you for all that you bless us. Ata jamia yat afanami. Medo, hom, om shanti, shanti, shanti. Amen. All thanks and praise to the Most High, Elohim. Respect and honor to all our ancestors, all our prophets, all our sages, past and present, known and unknown. Respect and honor to His Majesty Haile Selassie and Her Majesty Waizara Manen. Blessed love and peace in Rastafari. One perfect love. Namaste. Assalamu alaikum. Medo.